The whole idea behind the kids rule attitude gets more ridiculous as you get older. Sure, it's great to let kids live out the happiest lives they can, in fact it should be encouraged, but when you're an adult with experience with school, jobs and relationships, fantasies of kids being one of or the dominant force of society turns into something downright cute or outright annoying. The tightrope balance to making kid empowerment stories work for all ages from 1 to 123 is tricky, but if you can hit the right notes and maintain everyone's interest, you can bring out everyone's inner child. This is why I loved getting back into Codename Kids Next Door. Apparently, I watched a lot more than I thought I did. There were dozens of memories my revisit unlocked. This could mean one of two things. 1, decommissioning's a bitch. Or 2, the whole point of the show is to be nostalgic. For kids looking back on it 15 minutes later, and for adults looking back on it 15 years later. There's this instinctive feeling of return embedded in Kids Next Door. It returns you to the hardships of childhood and the kind of adventures you daydream about to overcome them. And that's why the kids rule motif works. This may be shocking to some of you, but Codename Kids Next Door came from the mind of an adult, 32-year-old Mr. Tom Warburton to be precise, and looking over his resume, he'd made his way around the animation industry, working on Nickelodeon's Doug as an assistant layout artist, MTV's Beavis and Butthead as a production designer, and Disney's Pepper Ann as a character designer. All very successful shows from a wide variety of networks, even if his credits didn't scream cartoon creator. But he got his big break in 1998, sending a pilot to Hanna-Barbera. Kenny and the Chimp in Diseasy does it. They didn't like it.
Disease help me hotline. Disease, please.
I've got Salmonella Fitzgerald!
I said they didn't like it, not that I didn't. But now, kind of insensitive jokes about disease aside, I'll admit that Kenny and the Chimp doesn't have a click, but one of Tom's other ideas in the pitch Bible did. There was meant to be a troupe of side characters called Those Kids Next Door, who would live next to Kenny and always have a new harebrained scheme for candy or schoolyard brownie points. This had far more potential, and his second pilot, Codename Kids Next Door in N.I.T.P.I.C.K, was far better received by Cartoon Network Studios. The new guys in charge now that Hanna-Barbera had started to dissolve. And the makers of time-tested classic Sheep in the Big City, Curious Pictures, picked it up for regular production. N.I.T.P.I.C.K aired on July 20, 2001, as part of the cartoon show's Big Pick event. Being the last winner, it was effectively the last ever franchise to come out of the cartoon brand when it began airing regularly on December 6, 2002. While it wasn't as big a household name as other Cartoon Network shows before and after, it did pretty well in the ratings and lasted 6 seasons, ending on November 23, 2007, with one last TV movie on January 21, 2008. Critics have also been pretty positive about it, and there weren't many complaints about the show's constant mocking of adults and authority figures. Now personally, I watched a fair bit of it back in the day, but as is the way with reruns, you can't really get the full story in a jumbled up order, because Kids Next Door has quite the story. Somewhere in an American suburban neighborhood, there's a treehouse that extends up into the sky, and in it there are 5 10-year-old children, Nigel Uno, Hoagie Gilligan, Kooky Sanban, Wallaby Beetles, and Abigail Lincoln, who each call each other number 1 through 5. In their extensive free time, they make weapons made of 2x4 technology and fight adult tyranny, which comes at them in the form of supervillains. Sounds simple, right? Think again. As the series continues, more is revealed about the Kids Next Door, namely that it's a worldwide organization of kids fighting adults, and it could be something even greater. I'll have more to say about the story as I go through the seasons, but it's one of the show's biggest draws. If you want an action comedy series with spy elements that gets more serious and complex as it goes on, Codename Kids Next Door was one of the first animated shows to do that wasn't about superheroes. And for that, it has value as a trendsetter. I can't see shows like Gravity Falls or Steven Universe being the way they are without those Kids Next Door. Number 1 is the most resentful towards adults and the most willing to pick a fight or get revenge. But that doesn't mean he's just a brat. You can tell he's intelligent and has his reasons to act the way he does. Number 2 is the inventor, having a knack for testing new 2x4 gadgets and gizmos, and having a rather bad sense of humor. Combine the two, and he's my favorite Kids Next Door member. Number 3 isn't too bad either, being the youngest member of her sector and the most immature, but that makes her more useful in scenarios where having a more naive child in danger is warranted. Helps that her obsession with the show's Care Bears parody, Rainbow Monkeys, is infectious. Number 4 comes from Cartoon Network's desire to insert a jerk into all their shows. It's a little harsh, but I gotta point out my least favorite characters when I see them. That doesn't mean he's never enjoyable, just that he'll have a much harder time getting on your good graces. That just leaves number 5, the oldest, smartest, and most active. If she's your favorite, I don't blame you, though they had a hard time coming up with flaws for her character, which made it a bit harder for me to feel like she was in much danger in her solo adventures. They all make up Sector V, a very interesting group, diverse too, and from the start, it was fun to see them bounce off each other, and learn what each of their most common journeys and fears were. For most of Season 1, Sector V is the only fraction of the Kids Next Door scene, which helps build a bond between the 5 kids in it. Except 3 and 4, but that's a ship raring to sail. I think balance between the good and bad of their world became more evident after their chemistry was set in stone, as the more villainous villains started popping up, and the worldwide Kids Next Door network was revealed. There's even a hierarchy emerging as we're introduced to Chad, the best fighter and most beloved operative. That means something bad's gonna happen to him. On the other side of the coin, you're also introduced to Tommy, number 2's younger brother, who does all the younger brother things you'd expect. He's another part of the show that starts out standard, but his adventures get more sophisticated with time. Sector V's main adversaries are the delightful children from Down the Lane, a creepily well-kept set of siblings set on ruining all the fun for every kid in the world but themselves. I didn't find myself getting invested in them nearly as much, except Lenny in Operation Undercover, but that's clearly the point, to show you that raising your kids to be nothing else but more bricks in the wall is wrong. And who raises them? Father. My favorite character, no exceptions. Whenever he's on screen, he steals the show and leaves behind a ransom note. His gleeful hatred for everything and fiery outbursts make him exactly the kind of villain this show needs. But while I was worrying about Mr. Warburton's relationship with his own father, I was being given an incredible rogues gallery that grew every week, including, but not limited to, the Toylinator, the weakest and most ineffective villain for the longest time. I like his role and jokes, but the voice could have used some work. The voice cracks are really overdone. Dr. Triple Extra Large from Kenny and the Chimp makes a return, but it's clear by his later appearances that he's not a big threat at all, just wanting to make the ultimate snow cone flavor. A bit of a waste of his changing animal body parts, but he's still an interesting case of a villain, and an early example that not all adults in the show were irredeemable killjoys. Mr. Boss is a gruff, stern boss of some of the kids' parents, and looks for ways to keep them out of adult sight. And he works well too. Mr. Wink and Mr. Fib were rather early villains, rarely being used beyond the first season, and I think that's because their deadpan manner of conversation is their gimmick. I still like them, but they were victims of the show's evolution. The Common Cold is a pretty gross adversary if you can't stand Snosh. I never had a problem with Snot, so I never had a problem with him. Count Spankula was already copyrighted by the internet, is another great one. He's Dracula, but he spanks kids instead of sucking their blood. Of course, he gets the most jail time out of all of them. There's also Sticky Beard, leader of a crew of candy pirates. This show likes candy, the crew liked having Mark Hamill around to voice him, and I like his design and motives. He's a win-win-win. Others like Nightbrace, Grandma Stuffin, and the Crazy Cat Lady are just what you'd expect, but they have their moments. They're not my thing though, but they don't compare to the most agonizing villain of them all, Lizzie. Number 1's girlfriend and easily the worst character on the show. She's overall very bossy, mean, and antagonistic towards everyone. She isn't worthless to the story, and I think she's meant to be a parody of clingy girlfriends, but still, more often than not, she's a struggle to sit through. And that's the thing, most of these characters are very useful to a compelling narrative. But you wouldn't know it by watching Season 1 alone.
Status report, number 5.
As per Operation Cake, party guests evacuated, cake located, and party clown neutralized.
I'll just say right now that Season 1 is a pretty good season, but it's not easy to squeeze back into after all that comes later. It's significantly more episodic, with only the finale being 22 minutes and having substantial callbacks. Most of the adventures are self-contained farces, but there's plenty of imagination going into them. A lot of the time is spent around showing how elaborate the Kids Next Door is, so it doesn't feel like you're simply watching a bunch of brats running around. The big treehouse they live in is well explored, from its power supply of hamsters on wheels to its many rooms as seen in Operation The Fly. Yeah, this is one of those shows with a title gimmick, but this one doesn't make it harder to remember which episode was about what. The only exception is the pool episodes, the pilot, N.I.T.P.I.C.K and the OOL, and the season 4 episode Operation Pool. The more you watch, the more used to it you'll get. But it's really a matter of if you want to watch more. The kids next door and their actions can be morally ambiguous at points, even when clear villains are shown. They're not above stealing and sabotage, and I can see that as a turnoff if you want to see them as heroes. Thankfully, their goals do get more heroic with time, as you understand the world they live in and how evil adults can be. But how about that animation? I really dig Mr. Warburton's art style. He had experience in the field after all. It looks like a kid's diary from the 70s with the bold line out and funky clothing and character shapes. Eyes were not a priority in season 1, however. Ever notice how with the base designs for Sector V, none of their eyes are visible? It's a choice they phased out eventually. After season 1, their eyes are visible more frequently, which helps in making them more expressive to fit the bigger stories. That doesn't mean it all started small. The background art is strong and the fight scenes are wacky fun. It fits the show like a glove, as do these stories. Operation The Fly has us follow a fly around the treehouse, seeing what the kids next door do in their free time, and how a mere fly can change that drastically. It was uncommon to show us kids being kids for such long stretches of time, but it makes for an interesting story. Operation Point embodies season 1 in some ugly ways, but captures its strengths brilliantly. The kids are naive to how teenagers would want to go up to a mountaintop one night and become adults. Innuendo ahoy! Operation Zoo has the creepiest premise of the season. An old lady kidnaps all the kids in town and puts them in a zoo. It may be the first time the kids next door and delightful children have to work together, but not the last time they bounce off each other better than you'd expect. Lastly, Operation Grow Up is a major turning point for the show. The practice of decommissioning 13-year-old operatives is established, number 1 is turned into an adult and has to live a depressing menial life, and Father makes his first appearance in the burning black flesh. It's a whopper of a season finale and dismantles one of the questions lingering over season 1. The show isn't against adults, it wants them to be more caring and helpful towards children. Adults made it after all, but you maybe wouldn't know it by seeing episodes like Operation Cowgirl. This lady's annoying, number 1's a complete dingus towards her for the most part, and her backstory of being friends with Mr. Wink and Mr. Fib takes some of the menace out of them. Also not a fan of Operation Piano, number 4's irrational hatred for pianos is a little too irrational here for my liking. And not even getting crushed by them can change his mind or make him more sympathetic. Best thing to come out of this one was the team of hamsters that act like the kids next door, but only because of another episode much later that expanded upon the concept. For now though, let's head into season 2.
Sorry I'm late, number 2.
Where have you been? I had to give your place in line to someone else.
Everything that makes season 1 a little awkward for a newcomer is ironed out now. The kids next door are now clearly heroes in a war against only the meanest, most fun-hating folks around. They've got their own moonbase now, that's how you know they're up to good. And the potshots at adults have more of an anti-authoritarian bend to them. There's often several reasons they're not trustworthy, but they poke fun at them when the need comes. But onto the juicy stuff, there's now an age restriction on soda, so the kids next door have to smuggle it. Way to make stories about prohibition in a Cartoon Network show. In fact, there are a fair amount of mature themes popping up now. Among them is a group of teenagers now bent on defeating the kids next door, one of its members being Cree, number 5's older sister. She's one of the more fleshed out characters, resenting anything childish and loving everything about being a teenager. Their dad is a bumbling doctor who wears sweaters. Back away from the dated reference slowly, without making eye contact, because this show can't decide if it wants to do the can't see their face thing. We see more of Sector V's other families too, especially number 1's absent-minded dad, who number 1 is kind of embarrassed about, number 2's tapioca-loving grandmother, who's another one of my favourite characters, and number 3's sister Mushi, who's down there with Lizzie, but at least not as much of a thorn. The feeling I get from them developing the families in season 2 rather than 1 is the kind where you know a really good friend, but don't go to their house until 6 months into that friendship. It's odd, but you get a better hold of who they are as people. But family isn't the only thing new to season 2. There's a new boss for Sector V in the form of number 86. a very loud and very Scottish girl who took a good long time to get on my good side. It shows that they were still getting better in the story and characters, and they had even better episodes this time. Operation Pop introduces that minor soda restriction plot thread and gives us Mr. Fizz, the best soda-addicted child bottling villain on the show. There are many tough contenders, but he's the best at those things. Operation Flavor is the episode about the legendary 4th Neapolitan ice cream flavor, and the way they make it this big Indiana Jones parody is perfect. I also really like how they got number 5 to go on all the life-threatening food-related adventures after this. It suits her personality. Operation Shave is a lot sillier than the usual grind, and that's saying something for the early seasons. But I could take a plot about alien mustaches that attach themselves to people and give them funny accents. The question is, would you? Caked 2 is the second installment of the show's annual tradition of having the delightful children tease the rest of the world with bigger and bigger birthday cakes. And I found the ending of this one to be the most satisfying, though be prepared, there's a few more caked missions after this. Operation Report is one of the big art show episodes, and it sees all of Sector V telling a story of their scruffles with the delightful children and their pizza box, in 5 different art styles. There's a lot of fun to be had in seeing each of their personalities visually come to life. Lastly, there's Operation End, where Sector V is decommissioned and only number 1 is able to escape, so they're all standing around memoryless, wondering if they're doing the whole kids next door thing right, which is pretty humorous. But then we learn that Chad hacked the system to decommission them early because his parents sent out invitations to his 13th birthday party early, and you see him slowly transition into a teenager before then anyway. It's a game-changing episode, so it's really great that it's really great. But Season 2 still had some rough patches. Operation Fugitive was a pretty useful introduction to number 86, albeit a very abrasive and annoying one. And why do the delightful children have a toenail clipping collection? It's not even simply gross, it's just a strange thing for them to do. But my least favorite episode is Operation Trip. Do you want to watch 2 bumbling Asian kids getting kicked around a lot, being played by Tom Kenny and Tara Strong doing really bad Japanese accents? Boy do I have an episode for you! It's good that stuff like this gets less common in the later seasons, and it's uplifting that even in a season as good as 2, its best years are still ahead of it.
Listen, number 3, there's an emergency!
Oh, I know, silly!
You're missing the tea party!
Season 3 feels like a reward. You now know all the characters, you now have a grasp on the stories they're telling, now they're going to extreme places with it. I'll always remember it for being a particularly scary season, with the threat levels rising drastically. It's less about fighting adult tyranny, and more about surviving out at sea, inside a stomach, at the center of a vampire outbreak, discovering a pink eye milking station at school. Yes, school is introduced. This is a pretty creepy period in the show, and I love it. They've still got a sense of humor about it all, and great characters going on their own adventures. Number 2 in particular is going to be a detective more often, like how 5 is now going on journeys for candy, now fighting against a German kid called Heinrich. All the kids are branching off, exploring a bigger world, and sometimes that has to be a scarier world. And remember Tommy? He goes through his own arc of training to be a Kids Next Door operative with some new friends, number 83 and 84. For what they are, they're pretty memorable. But after taking his booger out of the system in a world-saving plot, Tommy's irreversibly out of the club for good, so he's got a cape and occasionally helps out now. It's an arc alright, it ends unexpectedly, but is pretty satisfying and doesn't change Tommy for the worse. You'll notice that to fit with the bigger stories that can't be easily condensed, that the animation has changed. The lines have gotten thinner and the colours are more vibrant. This does nothing to hurt the visual identity of the show, and only makes everything more easy to take at face value. Season 3 truly has some of the best stories Codename Kids Next Door has to offer, like Operation Utopia. Number 1 ends up on a way too peaceful island that's basically a paradise for kids, but it all turns out to be a trap by a mad scientist to keep kids busy in an occupied world forever. Let it be known this was before the iPad came out. Operation Training and Graduates are the Tommy episodes I talked about, and they are as good as I make them sound. There's even a lot of body horror in the latter as everyone gets transformed into animals, but it has a neat shout out to Sheep in the Big City. Operation Archive is one big parody of a segment from the Animatrix, replacing mankind with kidkind and technology with adults. There's a reason you don't see this in many reprints of the Old Testament, some terrifying implications blossom by the end. Operation Jewels expands upon Number 5's quest for candy, gives her that new Heinrich rival, and throws in some Egyptian tomb raiding. I love Egypt, and I love this new rivalry. That leaves Operation Uncool, where they're on a mission to find a very valuable, beloved number. But the kids are picked off one by nerds who force them to watch a Dr. Time-Space marathon. Give it a year or two, and kids their age won't be able to get enough of it. I have a fondness for Season 3, but if I had to pick one memory that lagged behind the rest, it would be Operation Butt. It's not that bad if you want something silly, but at that, they make it seem really serious when Number 1 is being blackmailed by the Delightfuls because of a picture of his rear end. I should have mentioned that from start to finish, the show could get pretty immature. Sometimes it's part of their ideal kid world, and other times it was immature for the sake of it. Now Season 4, in my opinion, this is the best season of the show. It's still got the world building of 3, but feels more easygoing like 1 and 2. You can dip into this era of the show and come out with something a little edgy and a little crude, but still very enjoyable. Granted, there is some regression. Number 3 is getting angrier than she ever needed to be, and Number 4 is getting dumber than he ever needed to be. I don't know why their character development consisted of exaggerating their negative traits. And they're not bad all the time, it's just they've got a weaker grasp of what worked about them at the start. This is most evident in Operation Matador, where 4 joins this bully bullfighting tournament that his dad's being used in. That's strange, and 4's arc feels half complete. It would also be better if it didn't have Soccer Mum, one of the most annoying villains, but thankfully one of the most underutilized. But with some character arcs put on pause, Season 4 otherwise didn't do much different from 3, and it still had some of the best episodes of the whole show. Operation Pool being my favorite of the bunch, about a parallel world at the bottom of a pool with evil doppelgangers to the kids next door, the destructively nefarious kids. It's a fun time seeing parallel versions of all the characters no matter the show, and this takes a lot of advantage of the premise by injecting it with the kids next door's distinctive atmosphere. I also really like Operation Saturn, one of the more mysterious and gripping uses of the Rainbow Monkeys. They apparently make up Saturn's rings because a rainbow monkey AI just wants to be loved. Really weird, but really cool. Operation Munchies has another interesting, albeit more relaxed premise. Sector V and the villains all fight for the last box of Rainbow Munchies cereal in a store, but eventually call a truce to spite Nightbreak, who just wants to destroy it. A truce is just what these dynamics needed at this point. And for a story about a man not wanting to do an adult thing, wear a tie, Operation Not is pretty intense. I guess they just couldn't predict how young at heart millennials will stay, but it's a really good episode nevertheless. Last of all, Operation Maurice shows us the social consequences of the K&D's decommissioning system. One of Number 5's best friends, Maurice, is seemingly decommissioned and she's heartbroken, right up until he reveals that he's still part of a secret fraction of teens and adults who get to keep their jobs and memories. That's a relieving twist that keeps you guessing how the show's gonna unfold from here. Fun fact, Maurice is based on one of the writers who left in Season 4. That's not a good sign.
This is what happens when Number 4 is too stupid to remember that he is allergic to coconut. Let me guess. Coconut log!
We immediately plummet into my least favorite season of Codename Kids Next Door, Season 5. There are still plenty of good episodes, but some really interesting premises were squandered in a drive to make everything louder and grosser than before. Sure, I'm a stuffy adult who isn't as into loud and gross stories as the average kid, especially within the show's target demographic, but I could notice that I didn't like these episodes as much as the rest back in the day. One of the few materials that didn't abide by this change in direction is the first TV movie, Operation Zero. Father's father, grandfather, has started turning everyone on the planet into senior citizen zombies, and Number 1's only hope in restoring peace in childhood is by finding the mythical Number Zero, the founder of the Kids Next Door, which turns out to be his dad. If you like zombie apocalypse stories, this is your go-to, and if you're one of those fans who's really into the lore of series, this will be your heaven. I love Operation Zero. It's everything the show means to me wrapped up in 72 minutes of tense adventure with a little extra heart. And there were many other highlights in this tough adjustment period. Operation Caked 5 is the most epic of the caked septology, about father making an entire spaceship made of cake for the delightful children, and a Kids Next Door operative from the 1800s being unfrozen. And pardon my more modern lingo, but he is 1.5 hoots. Operation Breakup makes a sport out of breaking valuable objects, and number 4 retains a valuable lesson about their emotional worth. See, I don't hate all destruction-heavy stories, they can be good when they have a point. Operation Home sees number 3's oldest rainbow monkey being taken into a retirement home for rainbow monkeys that turns out to be a trap. Insane premises like this were the reason I kept watching. And Operation It is a really fun episode about a worldwide game of tag to choose the next Kids Next Door leader. I've seen less democratic approaches, but sure. And I've seen more valid reasons to hate a show. Operation Ducky, the one where Tommy goes on a pirate adventure to escape bath time, is one of the least gross out episodes I've ever seen, so it couldn't catch my interest well or ill. Operation Diaper is the one where Sector V just outright kidnaps babies from the hospital, but it's okay because the babies are evil and want their teeth. The saving grace is number 5 being the sane one in all this, but the joke of her telling everyone where babies really come from is a swing and a miss. And Operation Holiday has Lizzie being an obnoxious twit to everyone in a cockpit, flying so she can scold number 1 while he's on vacation. This is far and away one of her most annoying outings. We've got one more season to go now, and this one's actually pretty good again.
Oh, thank goodness you're here! Hey! You're not the Powerpuff Girls!
Keywords, pretty good. This season's story arc concerns a Splinter Cell being detected in the Kids Next Door, and number 1 being watched on a screen. It's built up and paid off competently, but I didn't feel like it had enough time to blossom, and the conclusion of the arc, and by extension the show as a whole, was a bit rushed. They were more insistent on giving us little finales for each of the other operatives in Sector V, sending them on their last couple missions. And to be fair, they did some complex stuff rather well. Number 5's rival, Heinrich, is revealed to have been a girl who got her femininity stolen by a caramel curse. I'm not that kind of critic that praises gender issues in media just for existing. There has to be a meaning behind it. And although this doesn't have a realistic meaning, I'm happy to see it resolved. Something I noticed about the animation by this point was the occasional lack of it. Live-action cutaways had sneaked their way into the show gradually, but were more common in Season 6. They're weird, but come on, isn't this a weird show? But I don't know if it was a creative choice, a budget-conscious decision, or because of Cartoon Network forgetting half its name in the late 2000s. It might be a combination of all three, but it's clear that by 2007, Codename Kids Next Door wasn't one of the channel's major breadwinners anymore. They were in the middle of a different generation. But before bowing out, they had a few more good episodes up their snotty sleeves. Operation England returns number 1 to his homeland while he's on a fetch quest for the Kids Next Door handbook. I appreciate all the English parodies they do, and how the ending, anticlimactic as it is how Englishmen would settle the situation. Operation 6 is my favourite installment of the Caked saga. It's a simple delivery that turns into a gripping car chase, which finally gives the time for number 2 and 3 to build some chemistry. Operation Party is one of the sillier episodes. The delightful children throw a soiree that overflows with teenagers and rock music, but it's all in good fun. I told you Zoo wouldn't be the last time they truced with Sector V. Last of all the good is Operation Science, about a 2x4 technology expo where all kinds of kiddie contraptions are shown and tested. I can tell the prop designers had a lot of fun in making this episode as dense as it was. Just one more batch of stinkers and you'll be begging to grow up. Didn't enjoy Operation Tricycle, because I felt most of the kids were acting mean and selfish for the first half, and the twist in the second half that the tricycle can turn into a giant monster trike was overly far-fetched. Then there's Operation Girlfriend, where Lizzie finally breaks up with number 1. You can see this change coming from 10 miles away, so while the adventure is fun, it's held back by the waiting game. There are just 3 more episodes I need to talk about. First, a crossover with the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, where Grim's scythe is stolen by the delightful children, and in a freak accident they turn into a soul-sucking Reaper monster. Meanwhile, bullcrap happens at the moon base. I think I'll need to have a full grasp on what Grim Adventures was like to get the most out of this crossover, but judging by its writing quality, I hate to hate, but that review will have to wait for a long time. The best thing about it is the plethora of Cartoon Network references and cameos. They were really good at making all their shows feel united back in the 2000s. Second, the penultimate adventure, Operation Treaty. A treaty between the kids and teenagers of the world is being prepared, but number 1 discovers something wrong with it, and begrudgingly gets stuck with Chad, who's trying to figure out what it is as well. It's now revealed that Chad is a senior operative like Maurice. A relief, but where were the clues? And with a premise as big as this, I was a little disappointed there was no closure between 5 and 3, even with the treaty falling through. It's a good episode and another fun adventure, but its placement in the show is a little haphazard. Last of all, the second TV movie and the finale, Operation Interviews. A couple decades into the future, the now grown-up numbers 2 through 5 are asked questions about number 1's disappearance, and they reveal that during the 7th K-King was turned into a big scavenger hunt, number 1 was abducted by the Splinter Cell and taken to operate at the Galactic Kids Next Door for the rest of his life. It's a very sudden way to end the series, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't see something like this coming. It paves the way for a very emotional goodbye to all his friends, an optimistic, bittersweet ending, and butters you up for this wonderful ending slideshow of nearly every episode of the series. But as the show became more action-packed and science fiction heavy, one question in my mind arose that was compounded by this ending. Did this all actually happen? Look, of course it didn't happen in our reality, but is this all a children's fantasy in their universe? If we take off the fiction goggles and go all the way back to the kids being kids dynamic of the early episodes, this can look like Nigel Uno and his family are moving away from the town they're all in, and his promotion to Galactic Kids Next Door is just their way of writing him out of their adventures. For now. That makes for a very poignant ending to Codename Kids Next Door, and still does. Legally. Mr. Warburton and his team aren't ready to give up yet, and pitched a darker and edgier sequel series to Cartoon Network in 2013. It's been rejected a few times now because of business politics and sales numbers suggesting that kids don't respond to dark action shows anymore. That's why their current action offerings are so goofy and lighthearted, and why Galactic Kids Next Door may never see the light of day. That and the reveal that some of the previously established characters are aliens, and Mr. and his team admitting they felt like it was fanfiction of their own work, so bam, there's everything I like and hate about the idea. But at the moment, it's in the growing around tier, where there are odds stacked against it, but I'll reserve judgment for if, big if, eventually it materializes. That being said, I lean very, very positive on what came from Codename Kids Next Door. It struck an even balance between silly and dark, style and substance, and child and adult perspectives on the world. I tend to structure my reviews to be not necessarily just my opinion, but a recommendation guide for 3 different types of people. The first is me, and I like it. The second is the 6 to 12-year-old demographic they're going for. They'll like it too. And everyone else, from everything I've seen, will definitely understand its worth as one of Cartoon Network's boldest, most distinct productions. Goodbye for now.